You can listen to The Front on your smart speaker every morning. To hear the latest episode, just say, "Play the news from The Australian."
From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Wednesday, June 19. Peter Dutton will today announce nuclear reactors will be Commonwealth-owned and operated as critical national infrastructure if he is elected Prime Minister. And today, at the Australians' Energy Nation Forum, Treasurer Jim Chalmers will seek to allay fears about giant renewable projects, saying community benefit will be at the heart of the government's future Made in Australia policy. Anthony Albanese has scrambled to recover from a diplomatic disaster after Chinese and Australian officials engaged in a physical encounter at federal parliament. It was all about the presence of a journalist China doesn't like. In today's episode, what the scuffle was all about and what now for the China relationship. Can you hear this? This is an Australian official, a woman wearing a black suit jacket with her hair in a bun, whispering at a Chinese diplomat in Parliament House in Canberra on Monday. The Australian says, "You are standing in front of my Australian colleague. You must move." The Chinese official, a man wearing a blue suit, completely ignores the request. The Australian grabs his shoulder and tries to pull him backwards. China's man doesn't budge. It's like the Australian official does not exist. This is the start of a stunning piece of geopolitics playing out in the main committee room of our Parliament House. At the front of the room are politicians, including Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and Chinese Premier Li Qiang.
There are 5 documents to be signed today.
They're signing agreements. They're called Memoranda of Understanding between our two countries. There are lots of flunkies bustling back and forth with pens and pieces of paper.
The document will be signed by Mr. Liu Sushe, Vice Chairman of the National Development and Reform Commission, and the Honourable Jim Chalmers, Treasurer.
This official visit is a big deal in thawing this relationship that has been icy cold for the past 4 years. The media and officials have been seated at the back of the room. To their left, there's a bank of cameras. You will have seen on TV news the kind of panning shots camera operators love. They focus on one area, then move across to another. In this case, there was a great shot to be had. Premier Li at the front of the room, and panning to the back of the room, one of the journalists in particular. That journalist is Cheng Lei, the Chinese-born Australian citizen who, until last year, was imprisoned in China. China claimed Cheng had broken an embargo on a news report on Chinese TV by a few minutes. But her 3 years in prison came as Australia's relationship with China went seriously sour, thanks to China's umbrage at Scott Morrison's suggestion they had questions to answer about the origins of COVID-19. Australia applied pressure at the highest level, Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong directly raising Cheng's case with China, and she was released last year. Cheng Lei is now a colleague of ours, working at Sky News Australia. And back to that crazy scene in Canberra. The Chinese official, whom some media have named as Thomas, is standing in front of Ms Cheng to prevent the cameras getting that great panning shot. Cheng and Premier Li in the same room. Another Chinese official joins him, a woman in a brown jacket, and she also refuses to move when asked. So Cheng Lei moves down a few seats, and Thomas and the brown jacket lady come around and try to block her again. But the Australian diplomat and another Australian official get in their way, squashing up like sardines, forming a kind of human shield in front of Cheng Lei to stop her being obstructed again. The Chinese officials push the Australians, trying to get past them. And now it's the Australians' turn to pretend they don't exist.
I thought, no way, it can't be as bad as it sounds from the headline. And then I watched the video and I mean, I was laughing, to be honest. I just couldn't believe what I was watching.
Will Glasgow is the Australian's North Asia correspondent.
I mean, if anything, the more you think about it and reflect on it, it's just completely woeful. That happened in Australia's federal parliament as the Premier of China was signing memorandums of understanding with Australia's cabinet ministers about mutual understanding, mutual respect, and apparently the Australia-China relationship being back on track.
What's incredible in this interaction is that these diplomats are pushing and pulling each other. This just does not happen. Not in any normal business meeting, and definitely not in the careful, etiquette-soaked world of international diplomacy, where even the way you hand over a business card is laden with significance. So I asked Will, is there a different context in which we should be looking at this? Are we missing something from a Chinese perspective?
I wouldn't get bogged down in Chinese cultural reasons for explaining this. This is a Chinese Communist Party cultural practice. I'm speaking to you from Taipei. That wouldn't happen here, right? Chinese Australians culturally don't behave like that. And look, I should be frank, I've met and spoke to those Chinese officials. When I've met with them, they're very polite people. I've never left any of my exchanges with them thinking, gosh, how rude was that person? Far from it. I've had the entirely opposite experience with them. But they're officials who work for the People's Republic of China. They represent it overseas. The People's Republic of China is run by a one-party Leninist state, the Chinese Communist Party, and their premier was in the room. And Cheng Lei is someone they put in prison for years. They accused her of espionage. That's the official view in China, and they thought it was outrageous to see her in the room. They think it's provocative. They think it's offensive. They think it could be embarrassing to their leader. And so they were acting on what they'd been told by higher-ups to do.
Here's what Anthony Albanese said about it at a press conference on Monday afternoon, directly after this happened.
Well, I didn't see that. I saw Cheng Lei and we smiled at each other during the event. Look, I'm not aware of those issues. It's important that people be allowed to participate fully, and that's what should happen in this building or anywhere else in Australia.
Cheng Lei herself didn't want to be the story. Here she is on Sky News.
Well, I wanted to get away from the guy who was standing next to me.
Fair enough.
And I think the worry is that my being there is a symbol of some sort. Maybe they didn't want that for the domestic audience. That's a guess. But like you said, we don't want this incident to overshadow the rest of the visit, which is the real news. Yeah, it's enough of a circus without me being the sideshow.
She was empathetic to the Prime Minister's office.
Well, what I know is that they've been working like crazy. And having dealt with Chinese officialdom on these sorts of events, and not even as important as these ones, they are very, very control freakish. So they want to know everything and they want to stage manage everything.
As the trip moved to Perth, Albanese realised his reaction had been too muted, and he hit the airwaves.
Nathan, Nat and Sean.
The local breakfast show on Nova 93.7.
Albo, hello.
Good morning.
Albanese wanted to fix the previous day's stumble, but in a friendly environment.
Why aren't you in the studio with us if you're in Perth, sir?
Gee, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you are. You are.
There was a lot of laughing about pandas, and then Albanese was asked how he's negotiating the relationship with China.
Yeah, how do you have a really strong relationship with them, but also keep them honest?
By being straightforward, by raising the issues that we have with China in a deliberate but a clear way as well. There's no point shaking your fist. It's important that what you do is to indicate the differences that we have. We have different values and different political systems. Mm-hmm. And we saw some of that yesterday, I've got to say, with the attempt that was pretty ham-fisted to block Cheng Lei, the Australian journalist who were able to get brought home at the press conference. And there was a clumsy attempt, really, to just stand in between where the cameras were and Cheng Lei, and the Australian officials did the right thing and intervened.
Yeah.
It obviously was not something he wanted to dominate with that press conference. However, his non-response actually just, if anything, amplified the story. I mean, the footage is the footage and the behaviour is the behaviour, right? But then compounding it is the Australian Prime Minister trying to wish it away himself. Is he being honest about not knowing, or is he being deceptive about not knowing to try to not hurt the feelings of the visiting Chinese leader? I think that clarity today, with not having to make that decision on his feet in that press conference and speaking to his team and probably seeing today's front pages of our newspaper and others, and hearing the media coverage of it on television and radio, the majority of Australian public seems to be appalled by what happened. And I think today was about making sure he responded to that.
Throughout the day, Albanese got more strident.
I met with Chang Lei after we helped to secure her coming home. She visited me in Parliament House in my office, and she's a very decent human being and a very professional journalist, and there should be no impediments to Australian journalists going about their job, and we've made that clear to the Chinese embassy.
And now Albanese's gone even further, calling the encounter rude and entirely inappropriate. The work of Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese to get Chang Lei back to Australia. One interpretation of that from the Chinese point of view could be that she had served her time for the offence that she had allegedly committed of breaching an embargo, and that she went back to Australia, presumably never to return. What does this encounter tell us about the way the Chinese administration actually thinks about Chang Lei and the release of her? Does this tell us that they think they've been humiliated in some way?
I think Chang Lei goes in a very large bucket of things they just want to kind of disappear away. She's a very inconvenient fact, just like the existence of the lobster ban, right, which they won't even acknowledge that that's ever happened, but it's very real. No live lobster's been allowed in legally for more than 4 years. It's real, that happened, you know. And there are so many things that are real points of tension in this relationship, but for China, they wanted the messaging of this to be that the relationship's back on track. That requires a kind of disappearing and an overlooking of a whole bunch of very real problems in this relationship. And our political system, we have a liberal democracy with a free press, and they would say they're creating a positive environment right now, positive sentiment towards Australia ahead of this trip. They wouldn't allow this kind of thing to happen. That's true, but, you know, our system's our system.
Coming up, what everyone missed while this strange diplomatic scuffle was happening. Our subscribers at The Australian get access to this kind of in-depth analysis 24/7. Check us out at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back after this break. What was going on at the front of the room while this strange pushing and shoving was going on at the back was the signing of 5 memoranda of understanding with China on everything from education to trade. Now, we don't know a lot of details about those memoranda, Will, but what does it mean that they've been signed, and how does the detail come out now?
We've been told the details will come out after Premier Lee gets on a plane and leaves the country, right? I mean, it's sort of another epitome of the weirdness of this relationship, right? I mean, we're sort of meant to report on it like it's significant, but we don't know what's in there, right? And I mean, I will go out ahead of seeing them and just predict there'll be very, very little of substance in there, right? I would expect under all the different themes, there'll be commitments for the whatever round of talks on this or that, exploratory meetings to create this or that dialogue. It's kind of a make-work exercise. There's a certain amount of just doing the theatre of Australian-China relations. I mean, we do have shared interests in a bunch of different areas, different economic areas particularly, but other cultural areas and other things. And so, you know, it's not like we don't have things to talk about, but I would expect that those MOUs will be very much at the fledgling stage of everything. And you know, this whole trip underlines the profound distrust that exists between Australia and China still. And I mean, all those MOUs on whatever topic, they're going to have to navigate extreme distrust between the two, right? So they're only going to be possible if they don't require much from each side.
Will Glasgow is the Australian's North Asia correspondent. It's a big day for The Australian. We're hosting our Energy Nation Forum in Sydney with the government, opposition and business coming together to discuss the big issue of our moment, how to keep the lights on as we transition to a new energy economy. You can follow it live at theaustralian.com.au, and we'll be back tomorrow with all the news.